Black veteran is fired for helping Melania Trump. Next day, he gets the news that changed his life. Before we dive into the story, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching our videos from? The diner buzzed with the usual morning rush, a symphony of clinking plates, murmured conversations, and orders shouted from the kitchen. At a corner table, a man in a worn-out jacket sat sipping black coffee, his eyes scanning the room like he was trying to read something deeper in the faces around him. That man was Harold, a retired veteran who had served his country for over 2 decades, but now found himself working as a security guard just to make ends meet. The medals he'd earned were tucked away in a drawer somewhere, gathering dust alongside memories he'd rather not revisit. It started with a small commotion near the entrance. Harold glanced up to see a tall, elegant woman walk in, her face partially hidden by sunglasses and a scarf. There was something familiar about her, but it wasn't until the whispers began that he realized who she was: Melania Trump. She moved quietly, trying not to draw attention, but in a place like this, anonymity was impossible. A few patrons began murmuring disapprovingly. Some whispered insults just loud enough to be overheard, while others stared with judgmental eyes. It didn't sit right with Harold. He'd spent his life standing up for what he believed in, and this moment felt no different. When Melania hesitated near the counter, clearly uncomfortable, Harold stood up and approached her. "Ma'am," he said in a steady voice, "if you'd like, you can take my table. I'm just about to leave." Melania's guarded expression softened. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. As she sat down, Harold went to pay his bill, but the cashier, a sharp-faced young man with a chip on his shoulder, gave him a hard look. "Why'd you do that?" the cashier asked, his voice laced with disdain. "Because it was the right thing to do," Harold replied firmly, not bothering to explain further. But by the time Harold returned to work later that day, the story had spread like wildfire. A co-worker met him at the door with a smirk. "So, you're a hero now? Or just trying to make friends in high places?" Harold frowned. "What are you talking about?" The answer came soon enough when his boss called him into the office. "Harold," the man began, his tone cold and formal, "we've received complaints about your conduct this morning. Helping someone like her doesn't align with the image we want to project." "What image is that?" Harold shot back, his voice rising. "The kind that punishes a man for doing what's right?" His boss didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, Harold, but we have to let you go." Harold left the office that day with his head held high, but the weight in his chest was crushing. As he walked home, he couldn't shake the feeling that his act of kindness had cost him more than just his job. But what he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. That night, Harold sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the few belongings he'd managed to keep over the years. Bills were stacked on the kitchen counter, their deadlines creeping closer with every passing day. He rubbed his temples, trying to push away the rising tide of despair. The TV flickered in the background, tuned to a news channel he barely paid attention to anymore, until he heard his name. His head snapped up. A news anchor was speaking, her expression a mix of intrigue and disbelief. In an unexpected turn of events, a retired veteran, Harold Green, was fired earlier today after assisting former First Lady Melania Trump at a local diner. Witnesses claim Green offered her his table amidst a hostile environment, a gesture that's now sparking both outrage and admiration online. Harold blinked. The screen cut to shaky cell phone footage from the diner. There he was, standing tall, escorting Melania to his table while murmurs swirled in the background. The clip ended and the anchor continued. "Social media is ablaze with reactions, and the story has gone viral. While some criticize his actions, others are rallying behind the veteran, calling him a hero for standing up against the growing divide in our nation." He sat frozen, his thoughts a whirlwind. Viral? People were talking about him? He had no idea how to feel about it. Proud, embarrassed, or maybe just confused. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to reality. It was a number he didn't recognize. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something made him answer. "Hello? Mr. Green?" The voice on the other end was warm but unfamiliar. "This is Melania Trump." Harold's breath caught in his throat. Ma'am?" he managed to say, unsure if this was some elaborate prank. "I wanted to thank you personally," she said, her tone sincere. "What you did today, it meant more than you know." Harold didn't know what to say. I, I just did what anyone should have done." "You'd be surprised how few people would," she replied. There was a pause before she added, "I also heard about your situation. Losing your job because of this, it's unacceptable." "It's not your fault," Harold interjected quickly. "I'll figure something out." "No," she said firmly. "You shouldn't have to. People like you deserve better. That's why I'd like to help." Before Harold could respond, Melania continued, "There's a foundation I work with that supports veterans like yourself. I'd like to connect you with them. They can offer assistance, not just for now, but for the future." Harold sat in stunned silence. Part of him wanted to refuse, to say he didn't need charity. But another part, the part that had been fighting alone for so long, whispered that maybe this was the break he'd been waiting for. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Melania paused, as if choosing her next words carefully. "And Harold, there's something else. This story isn't over yet. Be ready for what's coming next." Before he could ask what she meant, the line went dead, leaving Harold with more questions than answers. The following morning, Harold woke to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly. Groggy, he grabbed it and saw dozens of notifications, texts, emails, missed calls. Confused, he scrolled through them, noticing a pattern. Reporters, friends, strangers. They all wanted to talk to him. Curious, he opened his social media. His profile, once a quiet space with a handful of connections, had exploded overnight. Thousands of messages flooded in, ranging from support to criticism. The hashtag #StandWithHarold was trending. People shared their own stories of sacrifice, kindness, and injustice, using Harold as a symbol of resilience. Just as he was beginning to process it, his phone rang again. This time, it was an old military buddy he hadn't heard from in years. "Harold, you've seen the news, right?" the voice on the other end asked, excitement bubbling beneath his words. "Not really," Harold admitted. "What's going on?" "Turn on the TV, man, you're all over it." He hesitated but finally reached for the remote. The screen lit up to a live press conference. Standing at the podium was Melania Trump. She looked poised but determined, her voice carrying a strength that commanded attention. "No one should face punishment for doing what's right," she said. "Harold Green is an example of the values we should all strive for. Kindness, courage, and integrity. That's why I'm calling on businesses across the nation to support him and others like him. Let's prove that decency still matters." Harold's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. But before he could process it, another call came through. This time it was a representative from a large corporation. "Mr. Green," the voice began, "we'd like to offer you a position. Someone with your background and values would be a tremendous asset to our team." Harold was stunned. He hadn't even applied for a job, and yet offers were pouring in. But something told him this wasn't just luck. There was more to this than he could see. The next day, Harold decided to step outside for the first time since the chaos began. As he walked down the street, people recognized him. Some smiled, others waved. A few even stopped to shake his hand, thanking him for his service and for standing up when it mattered. But amidst the support, there were shadows. A sleek black car trailed him as he walked, its windows tinted, its presence unsettling. Harold's instincts, honed from years in the military, told him this wasn't random. He tried to shake the feeling, but it lingered. When he returned home, there was an envelope waiting on his doorstep. No return address, just his name scrawled in bold letters. He opened it carefully, finding a single sheet of paper inside. It read, "Not everyone is happy about your new spotlight. Be careful who you trust." Harold stared at the note, his heart pounding. Whoever had sent this knew where he lived, and they weren't playing games. The stakes had just been raised, and Harold realized this wasn't just about him anymore. Harold spent the night pacing his apartment, the ominous note replaying in his mind. The next day, he decided to take control of the situation. He called Melania, explaining what had happened. She listened carefully, her tone calm but resolute. "You're not alone in this, Harold," she assured him. "Let's meet and figure this out." They agreed to meet at a private venue downtown. When Harold arrived, he found not just Melania, but also a team of high-profile lawyers and security experts. "We've seen this kind of intimidation before," one of them explained, "but we're prepared to handle it." Melania looked at Harold. "This isn't just about you anymore. It's about standing up to a system that silences good people. Are you ready for that?" Harold nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "I've faced worse. Let's do this." Over the next few days, Harold became the face of a growing movement. Media outlets covered his story nonstop, and rallies were organized in his support. He used the platform not to focus on himself, but to highlight the struggles of other veterans and working-class individuals who faced injustice. His speeches were raw and heartfelt, drawing people from all walks of life. But the threats escalated. One night, his apartment was broken into. Though nothing was taken, it was clear this was meant to intimidate him. Harold didn't back down. Instead, he doubled his efforts, appearing on national television to call out the harassment and demand accountability. The turning point came when Melania invited Harold to join her at a high-profile charity gala. The event was filled with influential figures, from business moguls to politicians. Harold, dressed in a borrowed suit, felt out of place until Melania introduced him to a tech entrepreneur with a reputation for championing social causes. The entrepreneur listened to Harold's story and offered a partnership on the spot. "I believe in your vision," he said. "Let's build something together, something that supports veterans and working-class heroes." It was an opportunity Harold couldn't refuse. The announcement made headlines the next day, and the foundation they launched quickly gained traction, raising millions within weeks. As the threats subsided and the foundation grew, Harold found himself reflecting on how far he'd come. One morning, as he stood outside his new office, a young man approached him. "You're Harold Green, right?" the man asked nervously. "I just wanted to say, you gave me hope. If you can stand up, so can I." Harold smiled, realizing the true impact of his journey. It wasn't about the job offers or the media attention. It was about inspiring others to believe in themselves and fight for what was right. Harold's story shows how one act of courage can ignite change and bring hope to countless others. Are you ready to stand up for what's right? Share this story, inspire someone today, and remember, your kindness can change lives.